It's been a while since I've done this feature called Featured Extras, in which I take a look at the special features on a new Blu-ray release, a new home video release. Doesn't have to be Blu-ray, but I mean, DVDs, come on. But yeah, I'm here to take a look at the Criterion Collection's recent deluxe treatment of the movie Shaft from 1971, which viewers of the channel will know that I reviewed with Pat McDonald on our Nostalgia Like Nostalgia episode from last week. Well, here I'm actually going to dig into a couple of the extra features on this release, which is available on Blu-ray and also 4K UHD from Criterion. You can find a link below in this video. This is not a sponsored. I'm not paid to do this, but I really do enjoy digging into these features. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. I'm taking a bit of a different approach today. By the way, I'm Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat, if you didn't already pick that up from clicking on this video. And yeah, this is a relatively new feature, but we haven't done it in a while. So here we go. I'm taking a little bit of a different approach today in that typically when I look at extra features, I'm talking about making of documentaries, commentaries, that kind of a thing. But what struck me the most about what Criterion did with this release, which you can see here with the lovely Bill Sienkiewicz artwork, comics geeks will know exactly who I'm talking about. It's rather lovely imagery here. I looked at a it's a special feature talking about the detective legacy of John Shaft, Richard Roundtree's character in this famous, iconic Blaxploitation film. And I'm also going to look at the booklet. Yes, the interior booklet. I don't know how many people actually read these, maybe a lot more in terms of Criterion releases, because they tend to get some sharp writers with some brilliant essays. And this is no exception. The essay in here is called Power Moves by Amy Abugo Onigiri. And it discusses the legacy of, well, not should say the legacy of Shaft, but also the history of the director, Gordon Parks, and his fascinating artistic journey and political journey. And it's invaluable in terms of understanding not only the film Shaft, but also why it was such sort of a miracle that it got made in the form that it did. Some of these things I discussed with Pat last week, so you can definitely check that show out. Again, link down below. But in this essay, they talk about Gordon Parks' involvement with different political groups in the 1960s, namely the Black Panthers and also, Malcolm X and his movements, and basically turning his back on the militant aspect of the Black Power revolution, deciding to focus more on winning hearts and minds, I guess, through the power of art. And Shaft was the first, big studio Blaxploitation film. Sweetback's Badass Song came out the same year, directed by Melvin Van Peebles, and a lot of people dispute, which was the first actual like Blaxploitation film. Shaft was certainly the biggest in terms of, I guess, mainstream backing. And if you've seen the film, you know that Richard Roundtree's character is an iconic New York private detective who gets caught up in sort of a gang war between the Harlem mob and also the this sort of different warring factions from other parts of the country who descend on New York, and he's got to sort of straighten everything out. But what's interesting about the Shaft novel that was written by Ernest Tidyman, sorry, I've got some notes here, so bear with me. Ernest Tidyman was a white author who was getting into what was traditionally a black space with the Black Detective novel, which itself was an offshoot from the kind of white hard-boiled detective fiction of the era, or from, I guess, from the 1950s onward. People like Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. There was a whole wave of black authors who came to tell stories from black perspectives. Now, Shaft was an interesting case as far as character, because a lot of the early black detective stories presented these heroes as, straight, beat cops and detectives in the same vein as, the hard-boiled novelist. But they weren't very sexy. There was nothing, again, there's that word iconic about them beyond the fact that they were sort of being presented in a traditionally white medium. Then you also had the emergence of authors, the sort of counterculture authors, namely Iceberg Slim, whose novel Pimp really painted this kind of charismatic and attractive portrait of the black underground, crime scene, crime world, I guess. Now, I've not read Pimp, but I learned about it in a documentary that is also on the disc that I'll get to. But essentially, what Shaft did, and Ernest Tidyman somewhat in his novel, but Gordon Parks and Richard Roundtree definitely in their movie, was they took these two sort of disparate uh, types of fiction in the same genre and merged them together. So you had the charisma and street smarts of the underworld mixed with the law enforcement, fine upstanding citizen spiel of the detective story. And so what you have is a guy who can essentially walk between both worlds, caring mostly about himself, but also dedicated to solving the case and trying to maintain some kind of credibility in the neighborhood that he grew up in. Now, again, Ernest Tidyman was a white author, and as I mentioned in my conversation with Pat, there was a big push at MGM to release this as a white movie. Now, I know I'm talking about race and everything, and that's sort of a tired discussion in terms of the arts nowadays. But what you have to do is put yourself back in the mindset of the early 1970s, when you are just in the thick of the cultural and racial revolution and the after effects of some very significant legislation in the country, and realize how important these distinctions are. To have a black superhero essentially up on the big screen, someone people can identify with and try and emulate and look up to, a big contrast to the types of characters that had been portrayed earlier in cinema. So Gordon Parks was very influential in that, in what he did with the movie, what he did with translating the novel, what he did with bringing some real world examples, from his life and from politics and culture uh, onto the screen where it didn't exist in the original novel. No fault of Tidyman's really, but Parks and Roundtree brought some authenticity to a book that could use a little bit of a bump. The main difference between the written piece that I mentioned and the talking heads feature that I'm going to get into now is that the essay dives more into Gordon Parks as an artist and a filmmaker getting the movie Shaft made in 1971, whereas the Shaft and the history of the Black Detective goes more into the literary roots of John Shaft. As I alluded to a little bit more, he's sort of a hybrid between two archetypes. One of the more famous ones that I forgot to mention was Detective Tibbs from In the Heat of the Night, who was sort of immortalized by Sidney Poitier in the film. Um, and it's very interesting. I think it was Walter Mosley made the point that, yeah, even though Sidney Poitier was very respected and a trailblazer, he was not really considered to be sexy. There was an educated, sort of almost professorial air about him. But when you see Richard Roundtree as Shaft on screen, I mean, there's no doubt that everybody in New York wants to sleep with this guy, despite their sexual orientation, I imagine. But yeah, so getting talking more about those specifics, and I don't want to spoil the entire mini documentary for you. It's about 25 minutes long, and it's worth every second. But one of the fascinating translations that they made is to take the antagonist, or one of the antagonists from the novel. I don't remember his name, but his last name was Persons, and the thinking, I think, on Parks's part, rightfully so, was that the name was a little bit too on the nose for being a villain. So he created this character named Bumpy Johnson, who based on a real world Harlem Underworld figure named Bumpy. Sorry, I'm getting this wrong because they're very similar names. The character in the film is Bumpy Jonas, based on the real world Harlem Underworld figure of Bumpy Johnson. And this was not only a sort of a touchstone in terms of creative license, it was also a shorthand because a lot of Parks knew that a lot of his target audience would know who exactly Bumpy Johnson was. And would also understand that what they're seeing in the film is the hero Detective Shaft going up against this real world counterpart to Bumpy Johnson in the form of Bumpy Jonas. Again, I'm getting the names are kind of hard to keep straight, but that's because they're very similar. Um, and he also talked about how the film portrayal of Bumpy Jonas um, was more sympathetic than you might expect to see in this kind of a story. And I agree. There's a lot of sort of richness to the portrayal in the film, and also the writing. One of the things that I picked up on while watching this, which I caught these extra features after I had talked to Pat last week, and I think I had uh, been surprised. I wasn't exactly criticizing the film for being talkier than I'd expected or remembered, but one of the things that I really picked up on watching these special features is how important and layered a lot of the dialogue is between Shaft and the various figures he encounters in the movie. Yes, there are a lot of scenes of people talking in offices or in restaurants or in bars, but if you really look at the text and the subtext of those conversations, there is a hell of a lot going on. Much of that is unearthed here in this little featurette. So yeah, there's a lot of extras on the Shaft Blu-ray. As with all Criterion releases, the back is pretty much a short description of the film and a giant paragraph of all the stuff that they've thrown on as supplements. One of which I'll probably talk about Pat next year for the big anniversary. Then is well, actually, no, I think that's actually this year. So we'll have to talk about later this year. We got to make room for it. Is Shaft's big score? Yes, they threw in the sequel to this movie on its own disc, and it's a little bit confusing because the extra feature that I mentioned here, Shaft and the History of Black Detectives, is actually on that disc. So they break up the supplements between two films, even though a lot of them have to do primarily with the main movie. So if you pick up the disc and you're wondering what the hell is this thing I'm talking about, where is it? It's on disc two. So that's all. I just wanted to pop in briefly and discuss my great surprise and admiration for, or surprise at and admiration to. I'm getting my words mixed up again. Criterion for not only putting out a great release of a landmark film, and also a great restoration as well, but in taking the time to put together some extras that not only help viewers like me who are not as familiar with the material, give us some context as not only as to what the movie was, who made it, and why it was so successful, but really the complete genesis of the project and why it's important to understand it in a greater social and artistic context. So we don't get that a lot or all the time in special features. Sometimes it's just electronic press kits and little commercials for other projects. But Criterion wrote the extra mile here, as they oftentimes do. So yeah, go check it out. If you're a big Shaft fan, then you'll definitely want to get this release because, as I mentioned, it comes with the second movie on the disc. I don't know what happened with Shaft in Africa. Maybe that's another Criterion release forthcoming. No idea, but I'll be on the lookout for it because Pat and I have been going in on a Blaxploitation kick. I was a fan of the genre before we started talking about it, but yeah, I think we're gonna try and cover as much as we can because it's really cool stuff. And it's also a lot of times not exactly what you think. I had certain preconceived notions about what Blaxploitation was before I started diving into it, and all of those have flown right out the window. I haven't seen certainly all Blaxploitation, but yeah, Foxy Brown, uh, Big Caesar, definitely Shaft. There's a lot of great, rich stuff to mine. So if you're curious, go find it. And yeah, thanks for finding this video. Thanks for watching. If you liked the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you. If you don't like the content, please leave a comment down below. You can do that whatever you think of this video. We'd love to hear from you. And I should also mention that if you do leave a comment and you don't see a reply immediately, that's because I do my replies to comments in another video series called Don't Read the Comments. So I'm a little behind on that, and I look to rectify that situation soon. But I wanted to talk about Shaft, as everybody does, certainly Isaac Hayes. But until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much and take care.